right, we'll be in Genesis background chapters from 42 all the way up through chapter 50 today, and our focal passage there, of course, is in chapter 45. This being the last Sunday of the quarter as we finish the study in Genesis, and I always tell the other class over there, I said every time we study a book in the Bible, I always say, well, that's my favorite. And so, and we always glean more information. We always learn from it, and we always grow if we study and look into God's Word, and God the Holy Spirit will just reveal new things to us always. But looking back there, in the book of Genesis, we started chapter 25 in the study. Chapters 1 through 24 dealing with sin, and as sin came into the world, and as God set in place there, and man needs a redeemer. Man cannot redeem himself. Man cannot save himself. So for the purpose of salvation there, we have to have a redeemer. And so that was set in through a covenant God, through a covenant there that God made with Abraham, and it was started there in chapter 12 of Genesis there, and as God covenanted with him there that he was going to build with him, make of him a great nation. And in that great nation there, would come down through the years there and through his lineage there would be the Lord Jesus Christ. And we see, as we studied here in the last 25 through 50 there, 25 chapters of the book of Genesis there, that God dealing mainly there with Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, and with Joseph, the great-grandson. And so as they had come together here as God, through them, through the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and then we see here in this study there where Jacob became the third patriarch in that lineage there. And we studied there where Jacob's name, which meant what? Anybody help me? Trickster. Supplanter, as he gained a reputation of that. And then when he had went through a change in his life, as he was going through a change, a transition in his life there, then God changed his name to Israel. And that became the name of the nation of, that meant Prince of God, and so on there. And then we have Joseph there we've been studying about for the last little bit there. So as we look at it there, where did we leave Joseph last week? Anybody help me out there in chapter 41? Joseph was made ruler over Egypt. Joseph, he was a dreamer of dreams, and he was an interpreter of dreams. And because that God had used him, and Joseph gave God the complete credit for interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. And so we see here that he's told him, he said, it's not I, but he said, I serve a God. When Pharaoh would dream the dreams there, that there was what was going to happen, God used Joseph to interpret those dreams, and the seven kine there, and the 7 ears of corn, and so on, depicted the 7 years of famine, or 7 years of plenty initially there, and then the 7 years of famine. And so the 7 years of famine, had come about. And so, looking at the title of our lesson today there, the writer of our material there is entitled it, Reunited. As we think about our lesson today there, what's required to restore an item? Some of us there, and I remember Mr. Murphy that lived down when he retired from teaching and so on there. Even before that, he was a math teacher at Burnside there. He was my teacher, and he was a great teacher. I loved that man there, because he would give of himself there to his students there, and so on there. And I can share stories about that. But anyway, there he restored furniture antique furniture, and he would come down to the shop and get some wood occasionally there. He said, if you got a piece of walnut or you got a piece of this, that, sometimes some odd species is harder to find. And in that restoration of that piece of furniture, it took a lot of work, didn't it? It took a lot of work. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of resources. And so, but what about restoration of relationships? Is that not true there? As we look today there, there was, had been a long time that Joseph and his brothers had been estranged. You remember when he was 17 years old, that they sold him. He went down to Egypt, sold to Potiphar, was put in jail for a false claim against him there. And in all that, he kept a good attitude there. But now, after the butler there had remembered, when Pharaoh was looking for someone to interpret his dreams, he said, oh, I remember when I was in prison, when I dreamed, and Joseph interpreted my dream, and it came to happen there. So Pharaoh brought him in, Joseph interpreted dreams, and Pharaoh placed him as the vizier, as the prime minister, as the second in command of Egypt. And having put him there, he had a lot of power. The only thing, he says, I sit on the throne, but you rule everything else. And so, as we look at today's lesson and our background, beginning in chapter 42, now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look one upon the other? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. So here the famine was in the land. And don't you suppose that even though there had been 5 years of plenty, and then there had been 7 years of plenty, that maybe the people had laid up a little bit for themselves? They were aware of what Joseph was doing for the nation of Egypt. And I think it probably some of them, because this was 2 years into it now, and when this is taking place there. And so we see that not only was there a famine in Egypt, but there was a famine in Canaan, wasn't there? There was a famine there in other places. And, what are we to do when things like that happen? Are we to just sit down and holler, oh me, oh my, woe is me? No, we're to take action. And we see that this family is still a corporate unit. And in that, we see that Jacob is still the head of this. And him being the head of this there, obviously the boys looked at him to make the decision. There they sat and hadn't done anything there, and he says, hey, I'm observing there. I've heard, I know that there is food down in Egypt. Why are you sitting here? He scolded them, didn't he? He reproved them, for sitting back and not taking action. He said, it's time to get up and go and move, And so they were in Canaan. They were in the promised land. But as we see over in Timothy and other places in the Bible, that we're told this world is not our home. As we look in Hebrews chapter 11, we're told that Abraham was looking for a city whose maker was who? God. And so we need to realize that, this world is not our home. We need to look, beyond this. We need to look into the promises of God. And so he says, get up and get down there. And so they did. And we see, as they went down, what happened when they got down there. Joseph recognized them, but they didn't recognize Joseph. Joseph spoke either through an interpreter, or he spoke the language there of the Egyptians and so on there, but Joseph recognized them. And what can anybody help me out there? What happened there when when they arrived in Egypt. Pardon? Yeah. All right. You know, it had been a long time, hadn't it? He had been down. We're told there in previous chapters there that he was Joseph was 30 years old when he was put in the position of advisor of Egypt. There, he came down when he was 17. So 13 years had passed until then. And when he interpreted the dreams, and he was put in that position there, second only to Pharaoh. And then, after that, the 7 years famine, or the plenty had come. And so 7 plus 13 is 20. And now, we're told there, in another place there, 2 more years had passed. And so, it's probably been around 22 years. It's been 20 plus years, you're right, John, there, since that he had seen his family. Does that seem a little strange? Do we, as individuals, let time pass by, too much time before we restore relationships, before we try to restore relationships there? And why do you suppose that Joseph had not done that? He was a man, how far away was he from Canaan? You know, he had chariots. He had people under him there, that he had an entourage there that could have went before him there and taken him up to Canaan, you know, and so on. Well, we know part of the time that he was in prison, he was locked up, and as soon as he was let out, he was put in a position of responsibility. And I think that, you know, his time was so consumed, you know, and this all being orchestrated by God. I don't think he was supposed to go back. I think he was doing just exactly what God had orchestrated him to do, and he was obeying that, and he was living his life there, you know, in the will of God. And God was using him. God was blessing him there, and those around him, everywhere he was. Potiphar, you know, the keeper of the prison there, the captain of the guard, the Pharaoh, and all those, the butler and so on, they recognized God's hand upon him. And so we see here that in this, now 22 years had passed, and they had come back, and Joseph recognized his brothers. First thing they did when he got there, he said he locked them up, for 3 days in the ward, didn't he? When they locked them up for 3 days, then he brought them back out. He gave them grain, and he told them, he said, I don't know whether you're spies or I don't know whether you're true men or whatever. And so, but Joseph was inquisitive about his family, wasn't he? And they told him, said, we have a brother, a younger brother at home, and so on there. And, you know, we have a father that's still alive at home. And so he says, all right, fill your sacks up with grain. You all go on back home, but Simeon is staying here. Now, why do you suppose that he kept Simeon there? Reuben was the oldest. Reuben was the firstborn, wasn't he? And so as Simeon there, Simeon may have been the one, when they were selling him there to the traders and so on there, he may have been the one most cruel to him, the one most adamant about that. Remember, his brothers there, Reuben tried to talk him out of it. We remember there that, who else there made intercession for him? Judah, didn't he? Judah said, hey, let's just sell him. Let's get some money. And Judah planned on going back and getting him out of the hole there and taking him back home there. But that didn't happen there. The traders took him on down. And so, for whatever reason, that's conjecture on our part, but Joseph said, I'm keeping Simeon. And they went back home. And what happened when they got back home? They told their father all that had happened. And when they shared with him all that had happened there, and that Simeon was still there, he was very distraught, wasn't he? Because along with that, they shared with him, if we go back, he told us to bring Benjamin. And what did Jacob say? That's not happening. I've lost Joseph. I've lost Simeon. And now you want to take Benjamin down there. That's not going to happen. And so when it come time, when they ran out of grain, when they ran out of food again, when it was time to go back, and not only that, we remember there that their money had been put back in their sacks, hadn't it? And they were saying, what is going on? What is going to happen when we go back, And their father says, all right. Jacob says, you take that money back, and you just be honest with him. You don't know what happened. You don't know how that was a mistake that was put back in your sacks of grain, and you take double money. You take money to pay for the other grain you're getting, but not only that, you take a present to Joseph. Remember, it said you take the honey and the myrrh and the products of that land, even though it was in a time of famine, they had some of that. Well, that had worked for him before, hadn't it? Remember when he met Esau? He sent gifts to Esau, didn't it? And they came back together, and that relationship had been reconciled. But now, so he sends them back down there. And when they get back down there, but they wouldn't go. They said, no, we're not going without Benjamin. He said, no, Benjamin's not going to go. And then we see here, right before this, that Judah, he speaks to his dad there, and he said, listen, I think that was admirable of Reuben that he offered. He said, I will make sure, I will guarantee his return. He said, if he does not come back, what happens, Chris? No, he said, you can take the life of my two sons. Yeah. He said, that's how I am committed there. I will bring Benjamin back, And Judah, he reasons with him, and that shows, he didn't argue with him. He didn't talk down to his father, but he reasoned with his father, that we have to take Benjamin with us, And I will cover for him. I will stay, or whatever. And so they go back down again, and when they get there this time, we're getting up to our focal passage today, which I guess is about time, but anyway, there's just a lot of background. In this background, I hope you've studied that, and we're just going to touch some high points on it. As we look at our focal passage today, beginning in verse 1, as the writer of materials has entitled it, Revealed. And so in verse 1 through 3, it says, Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, cause every man to go out from me. Now there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. Now see, here it is. He has come. He's had, in this previous chapter, he had to turn away to hide his tears already. And so, as we look at the material today there, said there's three signs in a family reunion. That's three signs when things are going well. The first sign is the family reunion is going well when family members are delighted to be reunited. Tears of joy urge the bereaved. And is that not what happened here? That with, and I think somebody mentioned that maybe that there was joy in Joseph there when he saw his brothers. And so we see there that he had turned away, and now he could not hold himself anymore. His brothers there stood there in his court there, or before him there, and he says, all right, I'm going to just let it all out. And he ordered his workers there. He said, clear the room, get everybody out. This is family time. This is time to lay it on the table. He said, I can't hide no more behind that. The interpreter be gone, everybody be gone there. And he said, in verse 2, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. You know, he cleared the room, but was that emotional or not? When they went outside, his emotions were so strong there that they could hear through the doors, through the thick walls or whatever, that he was really having an emotional moment there. And these were tears of joy, were they not? Here he was there. He had met his brother that was only about 1 year old when he left up there. Benjamin had just been born. Rachel had just died when he was sold into slavery there. He did not even know Benjamin, did he? He had never gotten to know him, but he knew he was his only full brother, only full blood brother there through their mother Rachel. And, you know, that made the bond even more special. And he knew by his brother sharing already that he was the apple of his father's eye. He knew that Joseph had been there and had done that, you know, as he was shown special privileges and so on there. And he knew that now Benjamin was that son because he thought that Joseph was dead. And so he just burst out in tears there, and we see he wept aloud. You know, they heard him. In verse 3 there, and Joseph said unto the brethren, I am Joseph. He didn't beat around the bush. He didn't say, who do you think I am, or whatever, did he? He said, I'm Joseph, you know. Now, you would have thought they would have recognized him, but as we said there, 20-plus years had passed. He had changed. He was in a different attire. He had rings and jewelry and perfume and clothes and so on there. He was speaking a different language there. They weren't expecting him. They thought he was dead. They didn't look for him there. And he says, now it's time to reunite this family. It's time for us to come together again. I'm Joseph. What do you suppose went through their minds at this time? Oh, yeah, exactly.
It appears when they talk about it in chapter 42, when they start talking about, you know, we have this brother that's at home and one that is not. They almost have taken Joseph's name and completely removed it from their vocabulary. It's like for 22 years, they've never used the word Joseph. They never told him what their brother that was not name was. He said, I am Joseph. It's like the name hit them and they went, uh-oh, we're in trouble.
So grab the horses and let's go. Get out of town. And so as we look there and reveals, as he made his revelation there of who he was there, and his older brothers, they remembered, you know, all that had happened and so on, all that flashed back through their minds and so on there. And in verse 4, and Joseph said unto his brethren, come near me, I pray you. And they came near him, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. He said, don't be confused. I'm not another Joseph. I'm not some other Joseph down here. I'm your brother Joseph. I'm the one. He shared things that, facts that they would know that he was their brother, that only he would know. And so then we look at beginning verses 5 through 8 there, the remnant. Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me thither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years has the famine been in the land, and yet there is 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. He said, you know, don't be grieved, don't be angry, you know. He says, as he says 3 times in these verses, 5 through 8 there, that God sent me down here, you know. And we serve an omnipotent God. We serve an omniscient God there. He knows all, and he is all powerful. He can control events there, even of evil people, to make his plan come together. And in the plan of redemption, God had to preserve, as we look over in verse 7 there, and God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. He has sent me before that this remnant of this people, this Israel, this nation of Israel, would be preserved. Through this nation, God has chosen to bless the world. Through this nation, salvation will be coming through Judah and on down to Jesus, when Jesus Christ comes, and we can trace that all the way back. And he said, this is God's doing. Yes, you didn't do what was right, but God used this. God orchestrated this. Don't be angry with yourselves or whatever there. Put this behind us. This is over there. We are family. And it says, but God hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord of all his house, a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. God sent me down here to preserve this nation. I am second in command. I am ruler of this land. And wow, the blessings of God. What a great deliverance there he's sharing with them there. By Pharaoh's appointment there, it was by the divine will of God that this happened. And God was using him there as he had sent back for his brothers to bring them down there. And so we see here, he shares with them in reunion, verses 9 through 13. He said, haste you, go up to my father, and say unto him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou, thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast, and there will I nourish thee, and yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all thou hast come to poverty. And behold, set up and look, take notice there, pay attention, that the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that is my mouth that I speaketh unto you, and you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you shall haste bring down my father hither. All right. He says, behold, pay attention here. You're eyewitnesses of what's taking place here. I am second in the land. You can see the position I have. You can see the power I have. What I say goes. And I'm telling you to get up and go back. Almost sounds like their father talking. Get up and get down there. He tells them, you get up and go back. But when he tells them to go back, he said, you go back and bring your father. You bring Israel down here. You bring all the flocks, all the children, all the grandchildren. You bring everybody, down here. And then we see here that reconciliation there, or restored there, in verse 14. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him. Wow. He got to know his brother. He was beginning to know Benjamin there. But he did not just show love for Benjamin. He showed love for all his brothers. Reconciliation there. There's 3 things there, 3 signs of a family reunion is going well there. Said, if there's joy in seeing one another. Second, the family reunion is going well when old wounds are forgiven. And that's what happened, wasn't it? Old wounds. He did not hold his brothers responsible. He said, I know. God has revealed it to me. This is God's doing for the purpose there of preservation of this remnant, you. And when they came down there, how many was there? It was 66 people came down as we looked there. And then Joseph was down there. He had a wife and 2 sons. Was 4 made. There was 70 people in the nation of Israel at that time. this remnant he's talking about. This promise that he had made to Abraham. He had told Abraham hundreds of years before, he said, this nation, your people there, your descendants will go down to Egypt. They will be down there some 400 plus years there. And I will deliver them out into the promised land. They will be slaves there in Egypt. And he said, then I will deliver them. And he said, and so here they were coming down. Total of 70 people when they got there. And everything that was in that nation there. They went down, and we see there that Joseph placed them, and through Pharaoh's blessings there in the land of Goshen there, and they grew. And then 430 years later, they came out what? 2 million plus people. Isn't that only God can do that, isn't it? And so the third thing there, we know a family reunion is going well when old wounds are forgiven. The third thing, the family reunion is going well when the family members recognize that God's presence and purposes are what defines his people. Joseph recognized it was God's presence and God's purposes that they had come back together. He shared that with his brothers, that they could recognize the hand of God was upon them. And so as we reconcile with one another, it's important there that when we come together, it's hard. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time there. But if there is broken relationships there, if there is estranged relationships, in our families, in our friends, in our church family, we're to work at it. We're to make effort there to restore that relationship and to have a joy about it, that it would be genuine. Thank you.